So I'll give some information about how to submit a public comment on this as part of this process if you're interested. Thanks for starting the meeting recording. And then as I'm giving the presentation, I welcome questions. I know we have a good amount of time for discussion at the end of the presentation as well. If anyone wants to ask a question while I'm on a specific slide, if you could just unmute yourself and let me know, that would be great since I won't be able to see you while I'm sharing my screen. So let me put this in presentation mode and go through everything. So just some background, LCVP is required to direct 40% of the funds that we receive from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law bill to projects with outcomes that benefit disadvantaged communities in the Lake Champlain Basin. So we've received some guidance from EPA on how to develop a definition about what disadvantaged communities mean in the context of our work and in the context of our region. And the EPA guidance indicates that the definition should be limited to socioeconomic factors, and they advise to not include race in our definition based on past lawsuits that EPA has been part of. So specifically, the EPA suggests that environmental quality indicators, they come up a lot in our work, obviously, and those are important considerations. But the EPA suggests that we consider those separately when prioritizing projects within disadvantaged communities. So any project that the Lake Champlain Basin Program either funds or participates in obviously has to further our mission of opportunities for action, the management plan for the basin. So any project that we're providing funding to still needs to meet those kind of environmental quality goals or those factors. And then we're going to have this definition of a disadvantaged community that looks at some of these socioeconomic factors to help prioritize where our funding is directed. So to build this definition, we want to select some criteria that we can use to evaluate whether or not a community would be considered disadvantaged. So in order for the criteria that we choose to be useful for our work and our definition, the criteria must be captured by data sets that are available in both New York and Vermont and are also available at sufficient granularity, so at small enough units of measure that we can tease out where those communities are located and where those impacts are greatest. And if there isn't a definition that exists, or there isn't a definition that exists at a small enough unit of measure, then the criteria must be something that applicants can easily self-identify as part of the application process for funding. So I'll provide some examples of those kinds of two different measures a little bit later in this presentation. So to start selecting criteria for the Basin Program's definition, LCVP and EPA staff reviewed a number of definitions from relevant state and federal agencies and looked at the criteria they were using to start to identify criteria that we could pull into our definition. So there's a number of definitions that we reviewed here on the slide. I will just note that we really tried to align this definition as much as we could with both the New York State and the Vermont state definitions of kind of either environmental justice focus areas or disadvantaged communities criteria. The states are using a little bit slightly different terminology. So a lot of the criteria that we have included in our definition are also included in the state definitions. I will note that the New York State definition is still in draft form, and the Vermont definition has been passed into law. However, the state agencies are still thinking about how to operationalize it. So they have the criteria identified, but there's expected to be further developments on both of these definitions at the state level over time. So the LCBP Executive Committee has proposed to include the following 11 criteria in the Basin Program's definition. These criteria are estimated prevalence of cancer, high school degree non-attainment, housing cost burden, lack of access to indoor plumbing, linguistic isolation or limited English proficiency, median household income, National School Lunch Program eligibility, poverty rate, the presence of tribal lands or sites of cultural importance, and that would be for either state or federally recognized tribes. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, this is an example of one of the criteria that we would expect that applicants might be able to self-identify if they're applying to do a project involving tribal lands or sites of cultural importance, as there aren't really data sets showing mapped areas where these sites or lands are located. Finally, the last two, the prevalence of mobile or manufactured homes or the unemployment rate. And these criteria are captured by data sets that are, for the most part, available at the census block group level, which is the smallest geographic unit that census data is collected for. So census block groups are anywhere, they're not necessarily a fixed like land area, but they're anywhere between 300 to a couple thousand people per census block group. So in thinking about how we're going to actually use and apply this definition, just a couple slides I have for background information on that. So like I mentioned at the top of this presentation, disadvantaged community status will be used as an additional lens when evaluating projects that meet the objectives outlined in opportunities for action. So any project still has to meet the objectives outlined in OFA, and then we will answer the question of whether or not that proposed project would be taking place or would provide benefits to disadvantaged communities. Right now, the discussion has been that any community that meets one or more of the 11 criteria currently proposed for inclusion in the Basin Program's definition would be considered an underserved community. And the Basin Program and the EPA are working to develop maps that will make it easy to determine where communities that meet these criteria are located. A couple more notes. As I mentioned, all applicants will be given the opportunity to self-identify and provide a justification for why they should be considered a disadvantaged community, even if they are not identified on the map that is in the process of being put together. So obviously our data sets aren't going to be perfect for every community. Our map isn't going to be perfect for every community, and we don't want to leave any communities that are disadvantaged out. So a community will have the opportunity to make their own justification using the criteria we have identified, or potentially to make an argument for additional criteria as to why they should be considered a disadvantaged community. The Basin Program and the EPA are also working to compile a list of environmental quality data sets relevant to the Basin Program's mission. So the idea behind this is that we intend to develop maps showing these impacts and make them accessible to grantees to ensure that all prospective applicants have access to the same data. Groups that come in right now for Basin Program grants are really familiar with the kinds of data sets that we typically look for justifying a proposal. However, we expect that disadvantaged communities might not have that same capacity or familiarity with the kinds of data sets that groups that are more familiar with the Basin Program have. So if we put those data out there and make it clear that these are some factors that we consider on the environmental quality data set side, that will kind of help lift that burden from those communities doing this application process. So just a quick review. This is a very preliminary list of environmental data sets that have been discussed so far. We've been focusing on the socioeconomic criteria at this point, but these are some other criteria that have come up in discussions. So the impaired surface waters, like state 303D lists. So that includes waterways that are impaired for AIS, invasive species. Also data sets showing flood vulnerability, heat vulnerability, areas of concerns regarding aquatic organism passage, cyanobacteria blooms, beach closures, brownfields and Superfund sites, proximity to active combined sewer overflows, soil health related data sets, and lack of access to recreational sites or public lands. So that was a lot of information somewhat quickly, but just to go over some next steps. As I mentioned, we're at the end of our first public comment period. It ends at the end of tonight. So we've received actually a good number of public comments with suggestions on potential additional data sets or folks just sharing their opinions on the criteria that we've put out so far. Later this week, the steering committee is going to discuss the definition, the public comments received, and if there's any additional data sets that we might want to include in the definition. And then by the end of January, a draft definition will be submitted to EPA for approval. That definition will be used in the infrastructure request for proposals that we'll be launching in January. And then after those RFPs are launched, the Basin Program intends to hold a more in-depth public comment period that would involve direct engagement with underserved communities. Because of the time frame that these requirements have been coming down from EPA, we worry that some of these communities who might be identified on the map haven't been able to be involved yet, especially because we don't have the map developed yet. So we're really committed to doing that direct engagement with underserved communities and revising this definition after we are able to have that more direct engagement. So later in the spring, we would review those comments, update the definition, submit it back to EPA for approval, and eventually use this definition for more general Basin Program RFPs down the line. And we expect that process of, reaching out, hearing more comments or feedback from communities that are identified as part of this process as this continues in future years would be a continuous process of reevaluating this definition and adjusting it as needed as we hear more from these communities. So I will leave it there for any questions. And as I mentioned, we're accepting public comments on the criteria proposed for inclusion specifically at this time. So I will leave this slide of criteria up while we open it up for discussion. Any questions or comments? I see Lori's hand up already. So if you want to start us off, that would be great.
Thank you. Thanks for that great overview, Kate.
Lori, we can hear you very well.
Lori, you sound very far away.
I do. Do I sound better now?
Yes, thank you.
My external mic is right here. So, yeah, thanks for that. It's a very helpful overview, and kudos for you for allowing for extra time to really do extensive outreach to underserved community, because it is a very tight time frame at a challenging time of year. So I think that's going to be really important. I'm just wondering, and also for continuously looping back. So I'm wondering, you mentioned 40% of the BIL funds. Can you note what that total dollar amount is roughly for this year, just so we have a sense of which projects are being impacted? And then another question is, in terms of that follow-up to re-review the definition, is the Basin Program going to establish a check-in point, such as annually they're going to look at this decision? Or okay, so thank you.
Yeah, so I'll answer the first question first. And Eric, you can jump in if I have any of these numbers wrong. But I believe that the Basin Program is receiving $5 million a year under the infrastructure funds for the next 5 years. So that would be approximately $2 million this current year. And Eric dropped in the chat, it looks like 40% of 7.65 million. So somewhere in that ballpark.
Sorry, yes, I am sitting in the middle of a gymnastics studio surrounded by little kids in leotards at the moment. But yes, our appropriation from EPA is about 7.65 million. The total appropriation is 8 million, but they're holding some back for staff support within EPA. So 40% of 7.65 million is the target number there.
Okay, great. Thanks for helping out with the numbers, Eric. I am less familiar with our overall budget, so that was really helpful. And then, yes, we're thinking, we'll see what happens after we do the direct engagement and after this definition is out there, but we're expecting at least annually probably late summer before we launch our typical annual fall RFPs, we'll have a check-in on the definition, think about, any potential new data sets that might have come up, feedback that we heard from the last round of grant applications, and update the definition at least on an annual basis around that time. Yeah, thank you, Lori. All right, other questions? Karina.
I have a question, May. Thank you for that presentation. And maybe I just missed this, but I guess, and I did see the survey come around and I plan to provide comments, but I'm curious why, so you talked about the environmental data sets, but why is it just socioeconomic criteria in your criteria? Why aren't we including environmental conditions in the 11 criteria?
Yeah, that is based on guidance from the EPA. So they want the definition of disadvantaged community to focus on these environmental quality data set, or sorry, not environmental quality, socioeconomic data sets. I imagine part of that has to do with the fact that of the variety of programs that the EPA runs, and that the environmental quality indices that would be relevant to those different programs are different between each program. So focusing on the socioeconomic criteria. But as I mentioned, any project coming in for funding through the Basin program needs to meet the, restoration goals out and management goals outlined in opportunities for action. And we want to put those environmental quality data sets out there so that grantees can use them as part of their justification. So it'll be a really important part of the process overall, still, even though it's not directly considered in the disadvantaged communities definition.
Okay, and if there's other environmental data sets that aren't listed here, is there an opportunity to provide those in the survey?
The survey is just covering the socioeconomic criteria. Like I said, we've been focusing on that since that's the thing we're on a deadline for with the EPA. But we're definitely going to do some more outreach about the environmental quality data sets. I imagine the CACs would be very involved in that. And if you have any that you can think of off the top of your head, you're welcome to share them now. If not, I'll send around this presentation, or Katie will send around the presentation as part of the meeting wrap up. And you're welcome to email me or Katie to have more suggestions there.
Okay, that's perfect. And if you wouldn't mind showing that slide again.
Yeah, no problem. Yep. Like I said, these are broad categories at this point that basically other discussions like these people have come up with. So we haven't gotten too granular on these, and feedback's definitely welcome.
Excellent.
Right.
I'll add some in the comments if I think of more.
All right, thank you so much. So a couple hands up. I think it's Carrie and then Wayne.
Yes, thank you. I hope you can hear me. On your last slide that you had up regarding the how you're defining underserved community, you included both poverty and median household income, and wondering what the nuance, how you're perceiving this as two separate indicators.
Yeah, great question. So to get a little more granular about the data, the poverty related metric would be the percentage of households in a census block that are earning less than 200% of the federal poverty level. So that really captures fairly extreme levels of poverty that can get missed when you look at the comparison between a household's income and the area median income that's captured by the household median income data set, since some of those kind of larger values can wash out some of those smaller values. So they're obviously similar metrics, but it's just a way of making sure that we're including the folks with the most economic need. And the reason that we chose to include both is because we saw a number of other states or federal definitions that were including both for those reasons I outlined. So two ways of getting at economic, levels of need that aren't necessarily captured by just one data set accurately.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And Wayne.
Yes, Hi, May, thank you. So just a couple of comments. I've actually been dealing with this at work quite a bit frequently. I'm learning how to use the screening on different things, and
Yep.
you get some kind of quirky data out of that, depending on the community and the scope. But one thing I do like, so a lot of the programs that we're working with, I know this was all came down from the IIJB bill, but and a lot of the funding, unfortunately, now is going to this definition of disadvantaged communities. And that definition is really very tightly defined. We're just generally dealing with, is the MHI less than the statewide average? Is your water and sewer rate, more than 1% of the MHI? So the problem that I have with that is it's like the have and the have-nots. It very clearly draws a line on which communities qualify and which ones don't. And you could have a community that does not qualify. However, there could be a large portion or significant portion of the population that may meet some of those other criteria that are on the list. So I do like this. It just, there's some flexibility, and I think it opens that opportunity up for communities that wouldn't necessarily qualify for some of these funds.
Yeah, thank you. That's why we wanted to go with the census block group level. A lot of the existing mapping tools look at the census tract level, which is a larger geographic area, so it's harder to tease out those differences potentially in need. And then, yeah, just the number of criteria, trying to, capture a number of different types of need, and the opportunity for communities to self-identify if they don't see themselves on our map, but they still know that, maybe not within the census block group, but within a specific community that they would meet some of those criteria. So we're trying to make it easy for folks by having a map, but also make it so that we're, not excluding anyone with need, just because they aren't showing up on the map. I think I see Carrie's hand again.
Yes, I've been looking at the 2020 census data, and it appears it certainly it's less than adequate in terms of fully capturing populations. And the American Community Survey is only updated every 5 or 5 years with, and that also is the case with census block data. So how do you anticipate supporting or making sure that we're not losing opportunities to assist communities that may fall between the cracks?
Right. So the American Community Survey data is updated every year based on estimates. Obviously, that survey isn't, the census only happens every at a less common frequency than that, but they continue the estimates.
But not at the census block level. I think they only update it every yearly on a statewide level.
I would need to look into that. I know that the data that we're using that is available at the census block group level is the 2020 through 2016 estimates, which were just released earlier this year. And I know that they had, 2019 through 2015 estimates before that. So I'm not sure if it is only available once every 5 years, but I would need to check.
Well, I think it's that's the case with limited English proficiency, but you may be right. Maybe it's still adequate for some of the other criteria.
Mm-hmm. And then just more generally, the opportunity for communities to make a justification, even if they're not seeing themselves on the map, or if there's more recent data available at the community level that we don't have through the census data. We welcome communities to share that data and make the justification.
And if I may ask one more question about, again, about list of environmental data sets. And while Vermont may be a attainment state, there may be other communities within the Lake Champlain Basin jurisdiction pertaining to air quality and asthma rates. So I just mentioned that maybe.
Yeah, that's come up a lot because it's a common health metric that's used for identifying disadvantaged communities. I think it's a little tricky since we're very much a water quality focused organization. It's an environmental quality data set, but it has more to do with air quality. So So I think so far the steering committee hasn't been keen on including those air quality metrics. But I think once we bring this out to have more people comment on the environmental quality data sets, it'll be interesting to hear how much people think that's important and whether we should include it, even though it doesn't pertain as much to our direct mission.
Yes, but looking forward or looking into the future, and if we ever go to within our region have, say, some sort of waste incineration system in place, there will be, I think, perhaps environmental justice issues that may arise or could arise, or certainly underserved community-related issues pertaining to these potential environmental impacts. So I just mentioned it as an indicator for that disadvantaged community category relating to environmental impact. Okay.
That's a good point, like distance from energy infrastructure or potential pollution sources is a really good point. Thank you. All right. Any other questions or comments?
Mary Kay, when did you say the map was going to be done? And is that done prior to outreach to the disadvantaged communities as they've been identified?
Yes, so my colleague Ryan is busy cranking out some draft maps for the steering committee to look at later this week, but we hope to, with EPA over the next couple months, develop a kind of a web-based tool that will make it more easy for people to, go to our websites, toggle on and off these different criteria, see where those layers end up, after this draft definition is approved. And we will definitely have that available before we go out for comment with disadvantaged communities, because we want to make sure that people who, communities that might be identified on the map, are familiar with that tool and can see what it looks like with the different data sets that we include in our definition.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Does
Any more? Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. I was just going to say, does anybody have any other questions for Mary Kay?
I only want to say thank you. This is very helpful and greatly appreciated, and a very nice presentation. Thank you.
May, could you put the link to the survey in the chat if possible?
Yes, I'm going to stop sharing my screen in that case and then just get to that form real quick.
Thank you so much.
Sure thing. Yep, happy to share. And as I mentioned, we are planning to close the public comment form at the end of the day today. But if you have any comments, you're welcome to submit them over email or through this form that I am dropping in the chat right now.
May, can you say just a few more words about like how our partners will like interact with the definition? So like mostly this was for our grants programs and selection criteria, and that there's, it'll be interesting to see the map because then we'll see what it looks like. And I think a lot of the concerns or issues that folks have raised may also be captured geographically, even if they're not included in the specific definition of the map. And also that caveat, maybe make it, you can reinforce about if they don't meet specific criteria, they can create a case for their own situation.
Yeah, so we haven't quite gotten to, I mentioned a couple of considerations about operationalizing the definition. We don't know what exactly this is going to look like as part of the grants application process. We imagine that it would include, there would be a couple more questions on that application form that folks are familiar with. One would be, does the area you're proposing to do work in fall within the boundaries of a disadvantaged community as defined by the basin programs, definition. And then we would include the link to the map and an explanation of the different criteria included in our definition. And then another question would be, you know, if the community does not fall within the bounds of one of the census block groups that we've identified through our definition, do they meet the criteria based on other data sets or, you know, data that are part of our criteria list, but that we don't have maps for. So like I mentioned, the tribal lands or sites of cultural importance that aren't necessarily mapped, and people would be able to make a justification in that part of the application. Did that answer your question, Meg?
Yes, sorry. It wasn't a question so much as just
additional information. Sure.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yep, no worries. Just wanted to make sure I covered everything you were hoping. Okay, I think that's it. So I dropped in the chat just kidding. I'm seeing Wayne's hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, maybe just a quick question. Is there going to be any differentiation between like a town and a city or a village and a town? Like, for example, if the town qualifies, would the village automatically qualify, or are you going to get down to that level of detail?
So like I said, the data is broken up by census block group. So it will depend on, you know, if we have a town village situation, if they are in one block group or in two separate block groups.
It would apply to like a CDP designation or, okay, all right.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep, good question. Thank you. Okay, thanks everyone. Those are really good questions. I'm happy that I was able to share the presentation with you all. Like I said in the chat, there is the form for submitting public comments, which was the chat that I put in there. And then Lauren also shared our press release on this public comment process. So if you have any questions on that, feel free to shoot me an email. I'll drop my email in the chat, but it's also included in the press release.
When is the press release, has that gone out already, or is that happening?
Yes, the press release went out, I think about 2 weeks ago. So okay. The link to that press release is in the chat.
In the chat as well. Okay.
Yep.
Great. Thank you.
Sure thing.
I think our next thing on the agenda is the action item of approving last month's minutes.
That's correct. So I can pull the minutes up and share those also.
Great, thank you. Can I have
sure.
To approve these? Or do you all need a little bit more time to read them?
I'm reading them now.
Thank you.
Tell me if you have any thoughts on my scroll speed.
You're doing well.
I think I'll look for a motion in a second.
I'll make the motion.
Thanks, Carrie.
I'll second that.
Thanks, Karina. Any discussion or? All right, all those in favor, say aye or raise your hand. Or I guess let's do any opposed. Any abstentions?
Yes, I was absent, Wayne.
Okay, thanks, Wayne. So minutes pass. Thank you, everybody.
I abstained too. I was also absent.
Oh, is that Lori?
Yeah, sorry.
Thanks. Okay, I think we can move on unless anybody has any questions about that to the next item on our agenda, which is the action plan. And there was a draft that was sent out, and Mark, myself, some others made comments on it. And I think Katie did some editing and then resent out the draft that you have right now, right?
Yes, I have it up on the screen now.
Thank you. So there was a small group that met last week. I could not attend that meeting. It was I had a conflict that came up. So I don't know if anybody from that group wants to talk about the process or what happened during that subcommittee meeting.
Yeah, I think it was just myself, Mark, and Katie. And we sort of just went around sharing just ideas of what was updates as far as what's going on related to lake work in Vermont, and then a discussion looking at the old plan. And then Mark, Mark is sailing, he's on a boat right now, so he can't be here, but he said he would turn around our notes into this draft that he provided. And that's sort of where it's landed at this point. It's certainly not all inclusive, but it's sort of just a summary of what we talked about at that meeting. And that's really it.
I'm so very sorry, but I can't find this as an email. Was this sent to us?
I believe it was included. Maybe it wasn't included in the email that Katie sent out. I can share the link.
Yeah, I didn't see that. Thank you.
Yep. I'll drop it in the chat.
Karina just said that you're sure that it did feel like this was an edited version when I read through it of the action plan we had last year. And it looked like there was a lot, not a lot, but some work done to chop things out and also synthesize some of our work that we did last year.
Yeah, and I think it's the first year that I've been involved with the creation of this. I think when I joined last year, it had already been drafted, and we were in the comment sort of fine tuning it. So I didn't know. So a good portion of the meeting was just Mark and Katie filling me in on the background of just how much to take from the last plan or start afresh, and I don't. Yeah, so I don't really know if Mark, I do think things are similar, but there are certainly a little change of focus in some areas as well.
Great, thanks.
So I think now, if there's any discussion needed on any of the changes or anything that people aren't seeing in here that they think should be included, we can talk about those additional suggestions or any proposed changes. And then Katie asked me to share that the subcommittee that's been working on the action plan is going to be meeting or is organizing another meeting. So there's a doodle poll that I'm going to drop in the chat right now to select a time for that meeting. And it's open to anyone. So even if you're not on that subcommittee and you'd like to join, you're welcome to fill out the doodle poll and you'll get the invitation for the next meeting.
Yeah, I feel like because people didn't get this link until tonight, it might be hard to have thoughts or comments on this without having read it ahead of time. Sorry.
Yes, I would support a little bit more time. And if I may, thank you for sending that doodle poll. I would be interested in helping out the best I can. And I would like to comment, just make one note that's more general. What I've always appreciated with the action plan is it has always been just a bit ahead of the curve on issues, while at the same time recognizing where there are gaps. And I've always appreciated that. So again, some of the focal areas here, I think, are spot on. But there are some other issues in terms of not wanting to lose sight of important initiatives. And one of them, I think that, and maybe this would be just something for us to ponder and to have the steering committee kind of consider, is the whole issue of resilience, resilient communities, resilience from flooding, resilience for climate impacts, resilience for our rural communities. So I mentioned that because I think it's again, another opportunity for us to be looking at least from a water resources perspective, ongoing need in terms of ensuring that we are managing our surface water resources for a more resilient future.
I appreciate that comment, Carrie, and I was actually going back to the climate action plan, which is referenced at the top of this document, and looking at it, and I noticed just the focus on the restore upstream ecosystem services to protect our property, environment, and economy from flooding, and wanting to think about how to incorporate something about resilience into this plan as well. So thank you for that.
All right, I think hey, Kate, you could put the link to the doodle poll in the chat. Do you have that access to that? If not,
Yeah, I dropped it in there. Can you see it?
hang on. Gotta get to my team site. Yep, there it is. Perfect.
Great.
So if anybody wants to join on that, but also if you want to make comments on this, so Carrie, if you want to put your comment in there about having somewhere that it references resilience and the work that we're doing. You know, how important it is that we have a resilient environment, or any other comments if anybody else has any thoughts about what should be in the action plan. That next meeting, because it's December already, that next meeting will probably be where we come up with as close of a final draft as possible to be able to present back to this group and get feedback on for the legislative session, so that we can schedule our meetings for February is what I'm remembering we've done. That third or fourth week of February.
Hi, this is Bob Fisher. I would just like to say I enjoy the language seems slightly more aggressive than we've done in the past, and I like it. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Wayne, go ahead.
Yeah, just a general comment. On that first page, there's I don't think I have quite the latest version, but there's a third sentence down, emerging contaminants of forever chemicals like PFAS. And one of the things I know as we've been through this over the years is we need to be kind of simplify, be very specific about what the ask is for. I read that sentence and boy, there's a whole host of issues in that I don't know even where we go on some of that stuff. So just a general, I guess, theme or comment is we need to be very clear as what we're asking for here in some of these areas. And I don't know, I mean, I know septage and biosolids is important, but I think, you know, we need to really kind of focus on some things that are direct water quality issues here. There's just there's a lot packed into that sentence and a couple of the other ones.
Thanks, Bob. Or was that Wayne? Thank you, Wayne.
Yeah. And honestly, Denise, you know, there's a lot that we don't understand, and we're not headed. There's a lot of work to be done over there over the next few years, but, you know, and then we need to try to get this concise and be clear, and then try to explain this to a lay person in the legislature. So need to really think about how some of this is worded, I guess.
Thanks. So we'll take the comments that anyone makes today and make sure they get incorporated into the Google Doc as suggestions so that the next time the subcommittee goes through this, it's all in one place. Carrie.
Carrie's hand is up, yeah.
Yeah, just a bit in response to Wayne's comment, which I think is a really good one. I still think that there are an opportunity to stay high level, perhaps, to talk about the need for consumer protection, for example. I think there's a way you could still highlight the potential risks and opportunities for a greater focus on those opportunities that are within the realm of what Vermont could do, which I think in terms of consumer protection and clean, for clean water protection, there's probably a way to phrase something like that to so as to address or build on Wayne's point, while still at the same time keep the concern in front of the legislators.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. Sounds like the subcommittee has some careful balancing to do, but really good points. Lori?
Yeah, I think there's a lot in that emerging contaminants.
Lori, I'm sorry, can you just bring your microphone closer again?
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better.
Sorry. It's a new.
Oh, now we can't hear you at all.
Yeah, we lost you, Lori.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not sure what this is. It's going from green to red at times, but hopefully it'll stay on green, which is when you can hear me. But that paragraph on emerging contaminants, I'm just wondering. What last year we focused more on emerging contaminants, and I'm just wondering what the thought was. This is such a packed sentence that just hard. I reinforce what Wayne was saying too. There's a lot in here, so I'm wondering what was kind of the philosophy of in terms of the change more in approach from what we were saying last year.
Yeah, can anyone who polished it comment on that?
I don't think I can speak to that. So
Yeah.
I think that's a question for Mark or Katie. Sorry.
Hi, this is Bob. I guess along those, Bob Fisher, sorry. And I swore I would never do this on my phone again, but I am, because I'm not touching any button. I pray to God it wasn't me messing things up last week time. I would have, sorry, I'm almost losing my train of thought. A little more aligned with the climate action plan on building into core service areas. Obviously, everyone knows my opinion on septage. And forest defragmentation and all the obvious issues with emerging contaminants and everything with septage. And obviously, I couldn't imagine 100 years from now that all stormwater and all wastewater will clearly be treated. possibly at the local level if there's some really huge developments, but obviously probably at the macro level, certainly at the moment. So just the building in, that's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Bob, I intentionally avoided bringing up biosolids.
I appreciate it. And once again, I don't want to revisit this. I'm not advocating for biosolids. I like to make that very clear. I just like to advocate that there is, once again, there's no easy solution. It's very, there's nothing that's simple. Everyone knows. And, obviously there's all sorts of issues with air quality. And my next door neighbor, Jay, is the lead engineer for, I may have said this already, for DEC. And as I mock him occasionally and say, well, everyone cares about water, nobody cares about the air. I actually care about the air. That's me. So once again, I like to say I'm not advocating. I would advocate for bringing in DEC at some later date, one of our meetings, to discuss septage and land application and whatnot, because I certainly do not wish to speak and give facts for DEC, but I did loop back with them to make sure what I was saying was fairly accurate. And they basically agreed. So yeah, I don't want to go off on that tangent again, and I apologize. But obviously, everyone knows how I feel. And speaking only as myself, oh boy, certainly not for anyone. Once again, my main issue is forest defragmentation and continual outbuilding into the areas where septic tanks are now are released. And I really hesitate to say this, but I certainly believe that all data has shown so far the septage is obviously concentrated on those things. So I think that if the state were to enact PFAS, and I would mostly encourage it, limitations on discharges of anything, the wastewater facilities that accepted septage at that point would clearly be in violation of their federal permit. And any operator that accepts it would obviously fall under federal law. And that would be 1 year in jail or 10,000 per incident. Now that's maybe a reach on my point, but that would certainly be what I would have it, what I would litigate for. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Bob. Looks like Wayne has his hand up.
Yeah, just a couple of quick comments. I guess out of all the presentations, one of the things that's probably at the top of my list is the aquatic invasive species. Very disappointing with the lack of funding and staffing and the cutbacks. And I don't know, if we had half a page on that and that was one of 2 or 3 items, I'd be very content with that, because that to me should probably be at the top of the list. And it's simple, it's effective, it works, and really needs some attention and it needs some funding. So, that could be on here with 3 or 4 other minor things, and I'd be fine with that. The other one I wanted to comment on very quickly is there's a note here, something about mandatory septic inspections. I don't think at this stage that's probably practical or even reasonable, but one of the things that could align with that is I think that we could all do a better job of public education outreach to people that have septic systems, that live, in proximity to different bodies of water, about when a tank should be pumped, how frequently it should be pumped. That's something that I think would be a great starting point. It's just I can't imagine trying to require or mandate inspections for existing septic systems along Lake Champlain and other bodies of water. Just staffing with communities don't have the expertise, the state doesn't have the resources. And the issue, what's going to get more difficult here with PFAS and losing the land application, pumping septic tanks is going to continue to get more expensive as we have limited options. So people are, before they may have pumped it every 5 years, now that's going to be 7 or 8 or 10 years, and definitely has the potential to affect water quality, but something just consider maybe a first step or something of discussion to start there potentially.
Thank you, Wayne. Looks like Eric has his hand up. And Eric, I don't know if you're speaking, but you're on mute, so we can't hear you.
I
Okay.
just think that I just like to echo what Wayne said, because there's just not money out there enough to do those kinds of inspections. And anyway, I just like to say that I'll vote for what Wayne said. Thank you.
Thank you. So it sounds like maybe tweaking this language about mandatory septic inspection to, encourage more education and outreach on the topic. Eric, is that a new hand or?
No, that's an old one.
Okay, sorry. Thanks for clarifying. Sarah.
Hi, everyone. It's probably not appropriate for now because the discussion's on the action plan, but I'd be happy to share an update on some of the funding that Vermont DEC has recently received to do some outreach and education on septic on-site wastewater system maintenance to landowners, homeowners, as well as service providers.
I think that's appropriate actually to share right now, Sarah, just because as we're drafting the action plan, it's nice to have that information.
Sure. Hold on, let me just pull up, some notes. But these projects are just getting started. So we just received funding for our federal fiscal year 22 award. So that just came in this fall. So RFPs are being drafted. And I can just pull it up and share a high level overview with you. And as some of you may know, there's a lot of ARPA dollars that the state has put towards septic system replacement and assistance. And we are thinking about this funding opportunity as a way, or some of the opportunities through this funding to support that big infrastructure investment. So to have leave behind materials, now that some of these on-site systems have been repaired after failing, making sure that that doesn't happen again. But let me see if there's any other kind of highlights to share. And if you have any questions, I can take them now and do my best or follow up while I look at that. And there will also be some trainings and workshops for service providers and installers as well as landowners. So that's kind of another piece, as well as the development of fact sheets.
I think that's great. I am going to ask a kind of a clarifying question, because what I remember hearing from the last meeting we had on the action plan was having bullets at the top of like what actions we think the legislators could take in this biennium. And then maybe we could, the why is down below. But I think, Bob, you might have made that suggestion that at the beginning of the action plan this year, having like really clear 3 or 4 things that we'd like to see happen in this legislative session into next year, and then sort of the why underneath, which might kind of address some of the questions or things that everybody was talking about earlier.
Yeah, hi, it's Bob. Yeah, that's just, I just think I think we lose them real quick. We lose everyone real quick. Most people don't go past the first few sentences, unfortunately.
And that's my thought too. So having like 3 big bullets, like here's what, here are the recommended action steps. And then the 2 pages can kind of cover the why and the data. Thanks, Bob.
Does the group feel like you have a good idea of what those, upfront action steps would be.
Let me look at hang on one second. I don't right now, no.
I mean,
Okay.
I wonder if it could just be the bullets of the headlines below. I think that's what Bob suggested before. And we did talk about that at the meeting with Mark. It could be that simple.
I think anytime you say Bob suggested, you should probably shy away from anything I suggest. But just saying.
But we'll cross check with Carrie and Randy to make sure we're doing the right thing. Yeah, so the four, like the bullets that you have already, that have already been bulleted. Enforcement of clean water rules, must fund increased screening of pesticides. So there's really four big, am I imagining that? Is there four big bullets? And we could even shorten those sentences a little bit for the bullets and then expand on them down below. Sorry, there's more than 4, 5.
Yeah, all right, seeing some thumbs up and some nods, so it sounds like people like that idea. Wayne, you want to jump in?
Yeah, just a couple. And, I think we always go back through this. It really needs to just be 1 page, 2 sides at the most. And I guess I'll just put this question, is there anything we should drop? I'm kind of curious to get Eric's take on the coordinate water quality enforcement. This has been on, I think, for probably at least 2 or 3 years. And I think we kind of go back and forth with some kind of differing positions and opinions on this. So I don't know, maybe we need to, maybe one of these things at least gets dropped so we can squeeze this up into, 1 page double-sided. Because there's also some photos of things that go in here too. So this is probably, some of the stuff is probably a little more wordy.
It looks like Eric and Carrie unmuted. So Eric, if you want to jump in and answer Wayne's point about the water quality enforcement, I think that's a good place to start. And then we can circle back to Carrie and also if anyone has comments on things that could be dropped.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Like Wayne said, we've been going back and forth on this for a really long time. At our last meeting, Mark asked for a update from our Champlain Valley Farmer Coalition because they were meeting with the Agency of Ag and DEC to talk about programming and how things were going and all that. And we did have that meeting. It's about 20 people, mostly farmers, in attendance. And quite honestly, we were very impressed with the programming, the strategies they had in working with farmers. It's like, I'm not saying it's night and day, but the improvements that we've seen in recently has been pretty dramatic. So anyway, a lot of this, the animosity we were hearing before just seems to have gone away. And I kind of just blow hot and cold. I don't think from a water quality point of view, it's going to make any difference whether it's DEC doing the enforcement or the Agency of Ag. It's all using the same rules. It's just a matter of having enough people on the ground to do it. So that's where I'm at. I mean, I don't think from a true water quality point of view, it's going to make any difference which way it goes. That's my take.
Thanks for that response, Eric. So Carrie, did you still have a comment?
I think we could, I appreciate Eric's comment, and I think we could probably attempt to follow up with the agencies and inquire about this. And I guess my feeling is that perhaps at the minimum it could be reworded, freshened, shortened, and still talk about how critically important it is from our perspective that there's that collaborative spirit among the agencies to address sources of nutrient loading. And I think that in and of itself is, I think, in the public interest. So the point Eric made, if they are making improvement, that's fantastic. The more we can kind of highlight this and urge that continued improvement or improvement process to coordinate and collaborate together, I think we will be better off in the long run. So I still support it, but perhaps it needs to be refreshed to reflect the point that Eric had made, that and maybe just to get it verified, but to acknowledge that this is a, will take time as we all work together over the course of the many years in front of us to continue to see cleaner water. But the more we can encourage coordination among agencies, the better we all will be.
Thank you, Carrie. Lori, go ahead.
Yeah, I would agree. I wouldn't support removing a recommendation on water quality enforcement from the action plan. I can see consolidating it, but I think there's a reason it's been in there historically, and I don't think it's good if things are improving, but I and that's something certainly that should be encouraged, but I think it still merits a strong statement on our part because it goes to some chronic issues.
And may I add one comment? I'm sorry, I interrupted someone.
No, go ahead, Carrie.
This also has some value at the legislature as well. When we see that there's an interest for collaboration and ongoing collaboration among one branch of government, it also reflects, the decor and the intent in another branch of government. So I think it's a good lesson to have in here to acknowledge and demonstrate that we are not in silos. We need to continue to work across existing silos. But this is, having it in here is, I think, a good reminder of the legislature too, about the importance of that kind of collaboration.
Great. So it sounds like the takeaway on this section is to maybe update and try to condense the language a little bit, but that folks feel it's important to continue to make that point.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I just think, from Eric's perspective, I'd love to know what felt different, what was the mood and how, but also like, have they systematized it, right? Or is this just because of the current personalities or the current governor, right? So that if we get a new governor in 2 years, that this is still a priority for the Agency of Ag and A&R.
Eric, did you have a response?
All I can say is that from the programming point of view, from the personnel point of view, the farmers in our group are very comfortable now, and we're being asked as our group to work with some of the, we'll just call them the smaller farmers, the farmers that haven't necessarily stepped up to some of their obligations or water quality obligations. We like that method a lot. I think it goes a long ways towards water quality. And I'm just going to say that it's just a really good feeling around the room that improvements are being made, that they're listening to us, and I think we're really on the right track. And again, I don't think it's going to make any difference whether it's DEC or the Agency of Ag doing those the enforcement things. Anyway, it's kind of hard. It's hard to quantify, but we have the numbers out there to show that that the ag community is making significant improvements, and just we're going to go from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. So important coordination on the water quality enforcement section. I want to circle back to Wayne's earlier question. Are there any other sections now that folks have had a little bit more time to scroll through the document that we feel could be dropped or maybe reduced to try in favor of trying to condense this document?
I must say, I just need a few minutes.
Yep.
Won't be today to really evaluate this document since so I apologize for not being able to be as prepared as I'd like to be for today's meeting, but I would need more time.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I think it's good that we had some time for discussion with the group today. Looking at the doodle poll, it looks like the subcommittee that's working on revisions to the action plan is hoping to meet either late this week or early next week. So if folks want to take a little bit more time with the Google Doc, you can add any comments that will show up as suggested edits in the document. So you're welcome to add comments directly in the document. If folks can do that before the subcommittee meets, I think that would be most useful for that meeting time. And then I'll pull out, the comments that we've shared verbally on the call today and add them to the document as well so that it's all in one place.
Can you share with us the this document separate from what's in the chat? Can you? So that when this meeting ends, we could still access it.
Yeah, I can send it around as a link as well. I think if I just, yes, apologies, I'm a little less prepared with running this meeting when I normally don't, but I think I can just reply all to the most recent email that Katie sent and you all should get it.
Great, thank you. And you're doing a fantastic job, so.
Okay, well, fake it till you make it is what they say, so.
Please don't apologize at all.
Okay,
and
Lori, go ahead.
When you do that, just for people's ease, because I know everybody's busy and some CAC members are new and may not know where to look for it, can you send the current draft along with a link to last year's action plan too? So you can see, so everybody's got kind of one-stop shopping with that email.
Yes, I am sure that I can find that somewhere. So
I can send you that link. It's on it's on the Basin Program's website.
I was gonna say,
yeah,
sure it's on
in
our
the
website
CAC.
somewhere. So okay.
Yeah, I can put that link in. It'll just be helpful for those of us who have inundated inboxes to have them all
have
in
everything in one place. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you can just note that on the subject line that it's what it's got, that'll help us all tremendously. Thank you.
Yep. Sure thing.
Wonder about combining, and I'm going to say this, and I'm not sure yet, but I'll throw it out there. Combining the invest in agricultural transition to sustainability and the coordinate water quality enforcement. It's just something that we might be able to pull together because it's all under ag, right? Whereas everything else I think is a standalone section. I'm not sure, but I just wanted to put that out there for further discussion.
Yeah, any on the spot reactions to that? Otherwise, we can just mark it as a suggestion for the subcommittee to take up. And I see Eric's hand. You're muted, Eric.
I'm not good at that at all. The part about the legislators supporting transition, in a year when the budget may be kind of tight, there's already lots of monies out there for that. So to ask the legislators to support that, it's maybe kind of, I don't know. I don't think it'd go very far. There's something called the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center. They've got $30 million to spread around 11 Northeast states. There's a lot of money for that coming into Vermont. And that's the kind of monies that would, if the state needed to, wanted to, or should help transition some farms, those are the monies that are, those are just some of the monies that are available. So just making that point.
Thank you, Eric.
I also, thanks for that comment, Eric. That's really helpful to know about those sources. I also know that NRCS, as you mentioned, as you were insinuating with their number of programs, continue to focus on innovation. And I'd hate to have Vermont sit on the sidelines and not pursue some of those funds. And the legislature always looks at ways to maximize or to leverage state dollars if they can attract more federal funding to support this important work. So just want to mention that because I know that, for example, we put in $1 million last year's match for ecosystem service payments that will be used to leverage CSP funding under NRCS to support farm best practices above current regulatory requirements. It's kind of like those sorts of things that we want to make sure we can leverage. So if good ideas come up, Vermont should be jumping on them. And I appreciate you mentioning that particular funding source and indicating that there are others. But I still think that it would be helpful to let the legislature know this is an important economy, important for our economy. There's our dairy industry, our farming industry, and any chance we get to support our farms should make it a priority for us.
Thank you both. All right. So I know folks didn't get a chance to read this in depth. We can just leave a couple more moments for any reactions to the discussion on the action plan today. And Eric, go ahead.
The second sentence, the traditional commodity agricultural systems will always require subsidies. They always have and they always will. I mean, it goes back to the 1930s. That's why we have cheap food. If we want to spend 7, 8, 9% of our income on food, you subsidize agriculture, the commodity agriculture. And if you want to do like other countries do and don't subsidize agriculture, you spend 25% of your income on food. Just making some comparisons there. So that sentence in itself is, I have a problem with it because I don't think people want to pay that much more for their food. So I would like to strike that sentence.
Thank you, Eric. Anyone else have comments on that sentence? Great. I'll be sure to note the suggestion to strike that when I pull everything from the meeting summary into this document. Okay, so it sounds like folks want a chance to read this a little bit more. So the action plan subcommittee might be meeting as early as Friday this week. So it's a short document. Whenever folks get a chance, please feel free to go in and add your comments to the Google Doc. I'll send around the link as well as Lori suggested, a link to last year's action plan, so it's easy to compare. I'll also send out a link to the public comment period on the Basin Program's disadvantaged communities definition. Like I said, that ends today, but feel free to follow up with me if you have any questions or comments on that. And as you know, it'll continue to develop further. I can also share a copy of the presentation that I shared today, and that'll all be in one place for you all.
That would be wonderful.
Okay, great. Sure thing. Great. Anyone have any kind of final thoughts or little questions or requests for resources for that follow-up email? Okay, well, thanks, Denise. I'm glad we got to somewhat impromptu co-lead this together.
Impromptu.
I know that Katie will be excited to be back for the next meeting, and hopefully I'll grab everything as a follow-up, but I'm sure she'll follow up again if I miss anything. So thanks everyone for being here.
And I think our next meeting, everyone, is January 9th. If you don't attend the subcommittee for the action plan document. And ideally, after that meeting, we'll be able to send an updated version out to everybody that we can finalize on the 9th.
Okay, great. So yeah, a couple of updates on the action plan coming soon. So thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, and happy holidays, everyone.
Yes,
Happy
thank
holidays.
you.
Good evening.
Thanks,
Good evening. Take care.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye, Bob.
Bye.